Number 1. The flexible glass of Rome. Picture a workshop in the city of Rome, sometime during the reign of the Emperor Tiberius, between the years 14 and 37 of the Common Era. A craftsman is granted an audience with the most powerful man alive. He carries a glass bowl. He shows it to the emperor, then he throws it hard against the stone floor. Everyone in the room expects it to shatter. It does not. It dents, like a bowl of bronze, and the man calmly takes a small hammer and taps it back into shape. The emperor is astonished. He asks the craftsman whether anyone else knows how to make this glass. The man swears that he alone holds the secret, and that answer, according to the story, is what kills him. Tiberius orders him executed and his workshop destroyed. Why would a ruler destroy something so remarkable? The reason handed down to us is chillingly economic. If glass could be made unbreakable, then cheap sand could rival gold and silver. The whole Roman system of wealth, built on scarce and precious metals, might collapse. So the invention had to die. We know this tale from 3 ancient writers: the satirist Petronius, the naturalist Pliny the Elder in Book 36 of his Natural History, and the historian Cassius Dio. And here is the honest part. Even Pliny doubted it, calling the story more often told than actually proven. Could it have been real? Roman glassmaking was astonishing. Glass blowing had been invented only a little earlier, around 50 BC, and objects like the Portland vase show a mastery of glass chemistry we still admire. But a Roman furnace reached only around 1,000 to 1,100 degrees Celsius, and truly unbreakable transparent glass was almost certainly beyond that. So, we are left with 3 possibilities. The mainstream view says this was a legend, a story dramatizing anxiety about technology and money. A more generous reading says a genuinely tough glass really existed and grew in the retelling. And the speculative view wonders whether a real lost additive slipped away forever. If a single ruler could erase a material out of fear, imagine what an entire empire could erase. Number 2. Su Song's cosmic engine. Travel now to China, to the Song dynasty capital of Kaifeng, in the years around 1088 to 1092. There, a statesman and scholar named Su Song built what may be the greatest machine of the ancient world. It stood about 10 meters tall, roughly the height of a 3-story building, and it was 3 things at once. It was a clock, it was a planetarium, and it was an astronomical observatory. At its heart turned a great water wheel. But the genius lay in what controlled that wheel. Su Song's engineers built a scoop and lever mechanism that released the wheel one precise step at a time. This is called an escapement, and it is the beating heart of every mechanical clock. It takes a continuous force, in this case flowing water, and chops it into equal, measured ticks. This is arguably the first true escapement in history, and it predates the same idea in Europe by about 200 years. The tower also used an endless chain to transmit power, the earliest known chain drive anywhere on Earth. On top sat a bronze armillary sphere that rotated automatically to follow the stars. Inside turned a celestial globe, and a 5-story display of little figures who emerged to ring bells and announce the hours. Su Song wrote the whole design into a treatise so it would not be forgotten. The machine kept time to within about 100 seconds a day, and then it was lost. In 1127, the Jin dynasty captured Kaifeng and dismantled the tower, carrying it north. No one could put it back together. The knowledge lived in too few minds, and it slipped away. The 20th century historian Joseph Needham helped the world rediscover just how advanced it had been. And today, a full-scale reconstruction stands in Taichung. Think of it as a programmable astronomical computer, powered by falling water. The mainstream view blames simple upheaval. A closer look blames knowledge held by too few hands. And the tantalizing thought remains that had it survived, China might have led the world in clockwork for centuries. The same civilization had already built a machine that seemed to feel the Earth itself. Number 3. Zhang Heng's earthquake detector. Go back further to the year 132 and to a Han Dynasty astronomer named Zhang Heng. He built a device he called the instrument for measuring the winds and movements of the Earth. We would call it a seismoscope, and nothing like it would appear in the West for another 1,700 years. Imagine a bronze vessel about 2 meters across, shaped like a great wine jar. Around its outside sat 8 dragon heads, each facing one of the 8 main compass directions, and each dragon held a small bronze ball in its jaws. Below each dragon crouched an open-mouthed bronze toad. When a distant earthquake sent a tremor through the ground, one dragon would release its ball, and it would fall into the toad below with a sharp, ringing clang. The direction of the dragon that dropped its ball told officials which way the earthquake lay. The most famous test came in the year 138. The device dropped a ball indicating an earthquake far to the west, near Longxi, roughly 500 kilometers away. The court scoffed because no one had felt a thing. Days later, a messenger arrived confirming that an earthquake had struck exactly where the instrument said. Here is the frustrating part. The ancient record, the Book of Later Han, describes the outside and the function, but never the inner mechanism. It was almost certainly an inverted pendulum, a column that toppled toward the direction of the seismic wave and tripped a lever. Reconstructing it has been hard. An early model from 1951 was later judged not to work. But in 2005, a team led by Feng Rui built a version using a suspended pendulum that responded correctly to the recorded waves of real earthquakes. Zhang Heng was no one-trick inventor either. He built a water-powered armillary sphere and estimated the value of pi. Politically, the device mattered because earthquakes were read as warnings from heaven about the emperor's rule. After Zhang Heng died in 139, no working copy survived. The mainstream view accepts a genuine pendulum device lost to neglect. Others suspect it was too subtle to copy without its maker. The same brilliant culture built a cart that computed direction with nothing but gears. Number 4. The south-pointing chariot. This one sounds impossible. It was a 2-wheeled cart carrying a small figure whose outstretched arm always pointed south, no matter how many times the cart turned. And it did this with no magnet at all. Legend credited it to the mythical Yellow Emperor, but the first version we can actually trust was built by an engineer named Ma Jun in the Three Kingdoms period, around the middle of the 3rd century. The story of its making is wonderful. Ma Jun told the imperial court that such a device was possible. Officials laughed and insisted it could not be done. So Ma Jun simply built one to prove them wrong. The secret was a differential gear train, the very same principle that lets the 2 driven wheels of a modern car turn at different speeds around a corner. As the chariot turned, the gearing counter rotated the pointer by exactly the same amount, canceling the turn, so the figure's arm stayed locked on south. We read about it in the Book of Song and other dynastic histories, described again and again across the centuries. A famous mathematician named Zhu Chongji in the 5th century built a reliable copper-geared version of his own. In truth, the chariot was mostly ceremonial, leading grand imperial processions rather than guiding armies. The historian Joseph Needham identified it as the earliest known use of the differential gear, a device that would not return to Western vehicles until the 1800s. Modern reconstructions confirm that if the wheel sizes and gear ratios are exact, the pointer really can hold its heading through every turn. Some scholars think certain versions used a self-correcting feedback design instead. Over long distances, though, wheel slippage and rough ground would slowly throw off the direction. No original survives, so everything we know comes from words on a page and hints about gear ratios. You can think of it as an analog computer, continuously solving the problem of direction with brass and wood. The mainstream view sees pure open-loop gearing. The historical view notes it was invented and lost again and again. The speculative view imagines a cleverer self-correcting machine than we credit. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, an engineer had already made a sphere spin with steam. Number 5. Heron's steam engine. In Roman Egypt, in the city of Alexandria, around the 1st century, lived an engineer named Hero, or Heron. In his book on pneumatics, he described a device called the Aeolipile, the ball of Aeolus, god of the winds. It was a hollow bronze sphere mounted on 2 pivoting tubes above a sealed pot of water. When the water boiled, steam rushed up into the sphere and shot out through 2 bent nozzles, and the reaction spun the sphere in a blur. Stop and appreciate what that is. It is the first device in history to turn the pressure of steam into spinning mechanical motion. It demonstrates Newton's third law, action and reaction, about 1600 years before Newton was born. Hero was a prolific inventor. He built a coin-operated machine that dispensed holy water, a vending machine in ancient form. He built automatic temple doors, a one-powered organ, and programmable automata driven by falling weights and hidden valves. So why did this not launch an industrial revolution in the year 100? The honest answer is that the Aeolipile produced almost no usable power. It spun quickly, but with tiny torque, and there was no obvious way to scale it up. Roman metalworking could not produce pressure-tight boilers, or the precisely bored cylinders a real engine needs. Some historians add that abundant slave labor removed any economic pressure to build machines that did work, though that idea is debated. The crucial point is this: the principle of steam power was understood in antiquity. It was the materials and the economics that were missing, not the imagination. Hero stood in a genuine tradition of Alexandrian engineers, following Ctesibius and Philo of Byzantium, men who understood valves, siphons, and air pressure. A practical steam engine would not arrive until Thomas Savery in 1698 and Thomas Newcomen in 1712, refined by James Watt in 1769. The reaction turbine at the true heart of the Aeolipile would not be realized industrially until Charles Parsons built his steam turbine in 1884. Hero's writings survived through Arabic and Byzantine copies and helped inspire Renaissance engineers. Modern tests confirm his sphere spins fast, but delivers little power as built. The mainstream view calls it a clever toy. The historical view says materials, not vision, were the barrier. The speculative view mourns a near miss that might have industrialized the ancient world. Not every lost invention was a machine, though. Some were alive and worth their weight in silver. Number 6. Silphium, the miracle plant. Now, for an invention of a very different kind, one you could plant in the ground. Silphium was a plant, a type of giant fennel, that grew along a narrow strip of coast in Cyrenaica, in what is now eastern Libya. It grew almost nowhere else, clustered around the Greek colony of Cyrene, founded around 631 BC. And to the ancient world, it was a genuine miracle. Silphium was used as a contraceptive and as a medicine for countless ailments. It flavored food, and it made perfume. Its resin, called laser, was so precious that it was said to be worth its weight in silver. The city of Cyrene grew rich on the trade and stamped the plant onto its coins for centuries. Look closely at those coins, and you will see the seed pod, shaped like a heart, and many believe this is the true origin of the heart symbol we now link with love. But here is the tragedy built into it. Pliny the Elder recorded that Silphium could not be farmed. It refused cultivation and grew only wild, in its own native soil. That meant the supply was fixed, finite, and fragile. Overgrazing, overharvesting, shifting climate, and heavy Roman taxation all pressed down on it. Pliny wrote that in his own time only a single stalk could be found, and it was sent to the Emperor Nero as a curiosity, sometime between the years 54 and 68. Julius Caesar is said to have stored more than 1,500 pounds of it in the state treasury, right alongside the gold. And then it was simply gone. Silphium is one of the only major economic plants that human beings are documented to have consumed straight into extinction, dated to roughly the 1st century. We do not even know exactly which species it was. In 2021, a botanist proposed that a plant called Ferula druidiana, found in Turkey, might be a survivor or close relative, and the debate continues. Ancient writers from Theophrastus to Dioscorides described it in loving detail, and related phenols really do contain compounds that affect fertility. The mainstream view is ecological overexploitation. Others blame climate and economics together, and a few still hope a survivor grows somewhere in North Africa. Another substance was guarded so jealously that its formula died in secrecy. Number 7. Mithridatium, the universal antidote. Meet King Mithridates, the sixth of Pontus, who ruled from around 120 to 63 BC. He lived in constant terror of being poisoned, and so, according to legend, he did something extraordinary. He dosed himself daily with small, sub-lethal amounts of poison, slowly building up an immunity. To this day, we call the practice of building tolerance through tiny doses Mithridatism, after him. Out of this obsession came a recipe, an antidote meant to cure all poisons. The accounts vary, but it combined dozens of ingredients, somewhere between 36 and more than 60, including opium, myrrh, saffron, ginger, and small measured amounts of poisons themselves. When the Roman general Pompey finally defeated Mithridates in 63 BC, the recipe was reportedly seized and carried to Rome, where Pompey's freedman Linnaeus translated it. Later, the Emperor Nero's physician Andromachus revised it into a related medicine called theriac, adding the flesh of vipers. The great physician Galen wrote entire treatises on these antidotes, and that cemented them in medicine for more than 1,500 years. Theriac became a prestige medicine, mixed in grand public ceremonies, famously in Venice, where it was known as Venice treacle. And yet, here is the strange truth. The real original recipe was never reliably preserved. The proportions and even the ingredients varied wildly from source to source, which is the surest sign that the authentic formula was lost almost immediately. Some think the recipe was made deliberately complex so that no rival could ever copy or verify it. Modern pharmacology tells us plainly that no universal antidote is possible, because different poisons demand different treatments. But some ingredients, like opium for pain, had genuine effects, and that kept the faith alive. Theriac was only removed from the French official pharmacopoeia in 1884. As for Mithridates himself, the story ends in dark irony. After his final defeat, he tried to poison himself and could not, because his own immunity was too strong, and he had to order a guard to kill him instead. The mainstream view calls the antidote an overcomplex placebo with a few active herbs. The historical view sees a trade secret whose true form was never saved. The speculative view wonders about a lost combination that really worked. One empire kept a weapon so secret that losing the secret erased the weapon itself. Number 8. Greek fire. Around the year 672, the Byzantine Empire unleashed a weapon so terrifying that its very name still carries dread. We call it Greek fire. It was credited to a Syrian refugee engineer named Kallinikos of Heliopolis, and it saved the capital, Constantinople, from Arab sieges, first between 674 and 678, and again between 717 and 718. Greek fire was a burning liquid, projected across the water through pressurized bronze siphons, many shaped like the heads of roaring beasts, mounted on the prows of ships. And its most horrifying quality was this: it burned on water. Pouring water on it seemed only to spread it. Sailors learned to smother it with sand or vinegar if they could manage it all. It could turn an entire enemy fleet into a wall of flame. What was in it? We do not know. The formula was one of the most closely guarded state secrets in all of history, so protected that it was apparently never written down in full. The Emperor Constantine VII warned his own heirs never to reveal it, wrapping it in a story that it had been given by an angel. Modern guesses point to refined petroleum or naphtha, pine resin, sulfur, and quicklime, perhaps with saltpeter, but the proportions are lost. And it was not only the chemistry that was secret. The pressurized siphon that sprayed it was its own piece of guarded engineering. The Byzantines cleverly fragmented the knowledge among different specialists so that no single person ever held the entire process. That secrecy is exactly why the weapon vanished. When the institutions that kept it fractured, especially after the brutal sack of Constantinople in 1204, the knowledge died with them. The princess and historian Anna Komnene left hints of a recipe with pine resin and sulfur, and the chronicler Theophanes, the confessor, recorded its first use. The Byzantines themselves called it liquid fire or sea fire. No verified sample has ever been recovered. The mainstream view calls it a petroleum incendiary, lost through excessive secrecy. The historical view says fragmented knowledge simply died out. The speculative view imagines a formulation modern chemistry still has not matched. Centuries earlier, one man's inventions had frightened the mightiest army on Earth. Number 9. The heat ray of Archimedes. During the Roman siege of the city of Syracuse, between the years 213 and 212 BC, the defenders were led in spirit by one of the greatest minds who ever lived, Archimedes. And legend says he built a weapon of pure sunlight. The story goes that he arranged polished mirrors, or perhaps the bronze shields of soldiers, to focus the sun's rays onto Roman ships in the harbor, setting them ablaze from a distance. Now, we have to be careful here. The earliest historians who wrote about the siege, Polybius, Livy, and Plutarch, describe his cranes and his catapults in detail, but they say nothing about a heat ray. The burning mirror story appears only much later in Byzantine writers like Anthemius of Tralles in the 6th century and Tzetzes and Zonaras in the 12th. Anthemius, who was himself an engineer, worked out how many flat mirrors aimed at a single point could theoretically do it. What Archimedes definitely did build was frightening enough. There was the claw of Archimedes, a great crane with a hook that could reach out, seize a Roman ship, lift its prow from the water, and capsize it. There were catapults tuned for every range. His machines delayed the fall of Syracuse for 2 long years. When the city finally fell, a Roman soldier killed him, and the story says his last words were a plea not to disturb the geometric circles he had drawn in the sand. Was the heat ray real? A team at MIT tested it in 2005 and managed ignition only under ideal, motionless, close-range conditions. The show Mythbusters rated it, on balance, busted. Physics suggests igniting a moving ship at battle range was wildly impractical. Yet the principle of the parabolic burning mirror was genuinely known to Greek geometers like Diocles. And remember, much of Archimedes' own written genius was itself nearly lost, overwritten by monks in a manuscript we now call the Archimedes palimpsest, recovered only through modern imaging. The mainstream view calls the heat ray a dubious later legend. The historical view suspects a dazzling mirror array, exaggerated. The speculative view allows a real ignition under perfect conditions. Another commoner's invention was written down just once, then nearly forgotten for centuries. Number 10. Sheng's movable type. We credit Johannes Gutenberg with movable type printing in the 1440s, and rightly for the revolution it caused in Europe. But the idea itself was born 400 years earlier in Song Dynasty China, in the hands of a commoner artisan named Sheng, around the year 1040. His method was ingenious. He carved each individual character into moist clay, then fired the clay hard so the characters became durable ceramic. He set these tiny type pieces into an iron frame on a bed of warmed resin, wax, and paper ash. He printed, and then he reheated the frame to loosen the characters so they could be lifted out and used again. It was a true, reusable, movable type system, and it worked. We know all of this from a single, near-contemporary source, the scholar Shen, who recorded it in his Dreampool essays around 1088. So why did it not change China the way it later changed Europe? The answer lies in the writing system. Clay type was fragile, and Chinese script requires many thousands of distinct characters, not a small alphabet. Assembling a page meant handling an enormous set of pieces. And for most purposes, the older method of carving a whole page from a single woodblock was simply more practical. Woodblock printing stayed dominant. Sheng's original type did not survive. Only Shen Kuo's written description preserved the memory of it. The idea did not entirely die. Later innovators pushed it forward, including Wang Jin, who developed wooden movable type and a revolving table to hold it around 1300. In Korea, the book known as the Jikji, printed with metal movable type in 1377, is the oldest such book that survives, predating Gutenberg by decades. But Sheng himself held no rank, so his invention received little institutional support, and his specific ceramic technique was effectively lost. China had paper since the year 105 and woodblock printing since the 7th century, including the famous Diamond Sutra of 868. The mainstream view says his idea was brilliant, but unsuited to the script. The historical view blames a lack of rank and infrastructure. The speculative view imagines a Chinese print revolution that came first. Some lost technologies were not ideas at all, but materials no one could remake. Number 11. Damascus steel. For centuries, warriors prized a kind of steel that seemed almost magical. Its blades carried a rippling, watery pattern across the surface, and they held an edge and a toughness that European steel could not match. We call it Damascus steel, after the Syrian city, where so many of the blades were forged and traded. The steel itself began as woots, a high-carbon crucible steel produced in India and Sri Lanka from at least 300 BC, and shipped west as small ingots. Its carbon content, around 1.5%, together with trace elements in the ore, produced bands of carbide that formed those famous flowing patterns. Crusader accounts from the 11th to the 13th centuries spoke in awe of blades that could slice through a European sword, or cut a scarf of silk drifting in the air. And then, sometime around the middle of the 1700s, the knowledge died. Smiths could no longer reproduce true Damascus steel. Why? The leading explanation is that the specific Indian ore sources ran dry, the ones that carried tiny amounts of key elements like vanadium and molybdenum. Without those trace impurities, the pattern-forming carbide bands would not develop, and the process failed. In the 1990s and 2000s, the metallurgist John Verhoeven and the bladesmith Alfred Pendre reverse-engineered a convincing reproduction, pinning down the role of trace vanadium and careful heating cycles. Then came a genuine shock. In 2006, researchers examining a real 17th century Damascus blade reported finding carbon nanotubes and nanowires of cementite inside the steel. In other words, the ancient smiths had been producing a form of nanotechnology entirely by accident, and those nanostructures may explain the blade's rare mix of hardness and flexibility. Note that the modern Damascus steel sold today is almost always something different: pattern-welded steel, made by folding layers together. True Woot's Damascus depended on exact ore chemistry, plus a secret forging method passed down by word of mouth. When that chain of masters broke, the method vanished. The mainstream view blames ore depletion and broken tradition. The historical view stresses how secrecy made it fragile. The speculative view notes the full recipe is still not perfectly reproduced. The Romans left one more lost recipe, and this one is still standing in the sea. Number 12. Roman self-healing concrete. Walk up to a Roman harbor pier that has stood in salt water for 2,000 years, and you are looking at a lost invention. Roman concrete, called opus caementitium, was made from lime, volcanic ash, water, and rubble aggregate. The secret ingredient was pozzolana, a volcanic ash, especially from the region near Naples. And Roman marine concrete did something modern concrete cannot. It grew stronger in seawater over time. Modern Portland cement, patented in 1824, is stronger at first, but seawater slowly corrodes it. Roman marine concrete did the reverse. The Great Dome of the Pantheon, finished around the year 126, is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome on Earth. Harbor structures at Caesarea still endure. The architect Vitruvius described concrete recipes in his work on architecture, and Pliny the Elder wrote that concrete set in seawater became a single stone mass, impregnable to the waves. For a long time we did not understand why. Then modern science caught up. In 2017, a team led by Marie Jackson found that seawater reacting with the volcanic ash grew rare, reinforcing crystals, called aluminous tobermarite, right inside the concrete, strengthening it as it aged. In 2023, researchers led by Admir Masick at MIT identified small white lumps of lime, called lime clasts, as a self-healing mechanism. When a crack forms and water seeps in, those lime clasts dissolve and recrystallize, sealing the crack shut. The Romans made them by hot mixing with quicklime, a technique long dismissed as sloppy work. So why was this ever lost? Because the specific marine recipe was never written down in a form we could simply reproduce, and it lapsed after the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century. The vast supply networks that carried pozzolana across the Mediterranean fell apart, and with them, the know-how. For centuries, European builders could not match Roman durability, and concrete technology actually went backward. Roman concrete likely needed less heat and released less carbon than modern cement, and its dome used graded aggregate, heavy at the base and light pumice at the crown. The mainstream view sees a bundle of materials and skills lost with the empire. The historical view blames supply chain collapse rather than one secret. The speculative view points to refinements the texts never captured. Step back now, and a pattern connects all 12. Look across these 12 stories, and the same forces appear again and again. There is not one way to destroy an invention. There are several, and most of these losses combined more than one. The first force is deliberate suppression by those in power. The flexible glass was destroyed to protect the value of gold. Greek fire was locked away by imperial decree. The second force is secrecy that outlives its keepers. The recipe for Mithridatium, the formula for Greek fire, the forging of Damascus steel, all were guarded so tightly that when the keepers were gone, the knowledge was gone too. The third force is war and conquest. Susong's clock tower was carried off and never rebuilt. Archimedes was cut down by a soldier, and his war machines died with him. The fourth force is the breaking of supply chains. Damascus steel failed when the right ore ran out. Roman concrete failed when the pozzolana networks collapsed. Silphium failed when demand outran a plant that would not be farmed. The fifth force is being too far ahead of the supporting technology. Hero's steam engine, and Sheng's movable type were sound ideas that the surrounding world could not yet carry. And the sixth force is knowledge held by too few people and never properly written down, which is what doomed the seismoscope and the south-pointing chariot. Notice the uncomfortable truth in this. The more powerful an invention was, the more its makers tended to hide it, and hiding it made it fragile. A secret shared by 3 people dies when those 3 die. Written, open, shared knowledge survives. Political meaning shaped things too, since a device tied to heavenly signs or imperial prestige lived or died with a dynasty. And there is a crucial distinction running through all of it, between losing an object and losing a process. We can hold a Damascus blade in our hands and still not know how to make one. So the natural question is, what would it take to actually get these back? The good news is that the modern world has become a detective, and some of these lost inventions are slowly giving up their secrets. The tools are new, but the clues are ancient, hidden in old texts and buried objects. Consider Zhang Heng's seismoscope. In 2005, Feng Rui's team built a version with a suspended pendulum that actually responded to the recorded waves of real earthquakes, showing the ancient claims were plausible after all. Susong's clock tower has been rebuilt at full scale in Taichung, letting us watch the escapement tick just as it did 900 years ago. Damascus steel yielded to the patient work of John Verhoeven and Alfred Pendray, and then, in 2006, to the electron microscope that revealed carbon nanotubes hiding in a historic blade. Roman concrete has been especially rewarding. Marie Jackson's team found the reinforcing tobermorite crystals in 2017, and Admir Masik's team cracked the lime-classed self-healing mechanism in 2023, and engineers are now trying to turn that ancient trick into greener, modern concrete. The Archimedes heat ray was tested by students at MIT, and while it only worked under ideal conditions, the experiment taught us where the legend meets the physics. Hero's Eolipuli has been rebuilt many times, spinning fast and proving the principle even as it delivers little power. In 2021, botanists proposed that a surviving fennel in Turkey might be a relative of Silphium. Even Greek fire has been approximated with crude oil and resin, though no reconstruction can be proven authentic. Why do some of these efforts succeed while others cannot be verified? The difference usually comes down to materials science versus a truly lost formula. We can analyze the atoms in a blade or a block of concrete and work backward. We cannot analyze a recipe that was only ever spoken aloud. The primary texts matter enormously here. The writings of Shen, the treatise of Susong, the book of later Han. And sometimes the recovery is dramatic, as when the lost mathematics of Archimedes was pulled from beneath a monk's prayer book by modern imaging, revealing treatises on infinity and the method of exhaustion that the world had never read. Archaeology has its limits, though. A buried object can tell us its final chemistry, but rarely the exact sequence of choices that produced it. The temperature, the timing, the flux. That gap between a plausible reproduction and a proven one is where many of these mysteries still live. Each rediscovery rewrites the history of technology, and each one asks us to be humbler about the people we once dismissed as primitive. If you take one idea away from these 12 stories, let it be this. Progress is not a straight line, and it is not guaranteed. We like to imagine that human knowledge only accumulates, climbing steadily upward from the crude past to the clever present. But the real record is full of peaks that were reached and then abandoned, of knowledge that flared brightly and then went dark. Think about how much practical skill may have vanished entirely, leaving no trace at all, no text, no artifact, nothing for a modern detective to recover. The inventions in this video are the lucky ones, remembered because someone wrote them down, or because an object survived. For every one of these, there may be others we will never even know existed. And when we watch scientists relearn how to make self-healing concrete or nanostructured steel, we should feel a strange humility. In many ways, we are not only inventing the future, we are also rediscovering the past. There is a warning threaded through all of this, and it is as relevant now as it was 2,000 years ago. Knowledge that is hoarded is knowledge that is fragile. The craftsman who told Tiberius that only he knew the secret sealed his own fate and the fate of his invention in the same breath. A plant eaten to nothing, a genius struck down mid-thought, a formula burned into silence by the fall of an empire. Each of these was a door that closed, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, on something humanity had already achieved. So the next time you hear that history is a story of constant progress, remember the flexible glass and the cosmic engine and the fire that burned on water. Remember that the powerful have always been tempted to bury what they fear, and that empires take their secrets down with them when they fall. Perhaps somewhere in an unread manuscript, another lost invention is still waiting. And perhaps the real question is not only what the ancients knew, but what we ourselves might be losing right now, without even noticing.